As the League of Legends roster continues to add new characters, the distribution of market share naturally gets thinner with every edition. We're now over 170 champions at this point, with an average of 3 or 4 new ones being included every year. Trying to balance a cast to where everyone sees a decent range of play can be a near impossible task with even 25 characters, let alone. So it's not completely abnormal for there to be the popular ones and the non-popular ones. That said, usually when you think of champions that consistently remain unpopular throughout the year or unsuccessful, reasons for why that might be the case lean more on gameplay experience or inherent flaws that make it difficult for players to feel a strong sense of agency. Balance of course does play a part, with a handful of picks being subject to the quote-unquote pro play jail. At the same time, however, there are some champions in this game that very easily could be more popular than they are if they were just given a small touch-up, yet it feels almost like Riot either forgot they existed or gives more attention to other champions in 1 year than these guys get in 5. For today, we'll be discussing some of the game's quote-unquote forgotten champions, talking about why they don't get much attention even in spite of their various strengths. The ebb and flow of champion popularity is part of what makes the game so enduring. In spring, you might have these champions be really popular, but then in summer, it could be those champions who are popular, and then in autumn, it could be some other champs that are popular. So while it might not be feasible for every champion to be in the spotlight at the same time, everyone should be able to have a moment where they're a priority pick, in theory. In practice, you'll run into a portion of the cast that almost never gets a chance to shine for more than at most a patch or two. Any semblance of leeway they get is often met with an immediate nerf the following patch, or in other cases, they're never thrown a bone to begin with. What's perplexing is that unlike the ones chosen for the visual gameplay update initiative like the upcoming Sejuani, the champions we have right now are perfectly functionable in their current state. Maybe not ideal, but you would think they're practical tools that make them get picked a lot more than they usually do. They might just need a bit more in the tank to get to that point. So why doesn't Riot give it to them? Case by case basis of course, so we'll have to go through a couple of them to show you what I mean. I had the idea to make this episode after the recent buff given to Sejuani last month. Sejuani by all accounts is one of the least popular tanks in the game. She used to be a huge meta staple during the mid-2010s, a relatively straightforward jungle tank with excellent durability and engage, not to mention a hefty amount of damage to go along with it. But over the past few years, you'd be lucky to run into her maybe once every 100 games. In 15.24, she was given a nice spread of buffs across the board. Mana cost went down, her Q lost a full second on its cooldown, and her ultimate was also made faster too. Additionally, they popped a few buffs on her AP ratios to account for any supplementary ability power she might receive, like the Flowers on Anakan, Baron buff, or maybe if you wanted to get one AP item like a Rylai's or Liandry's. Two things that caught my attention regarding this. One, the last time Sejuani was addressed in balance changes was back in 14.9 over a year and a half ago, and it's not like she was in a healthy spot that whole time. For the entire length, spanning early 2024 to late 2025, Sejuani had one of the lowest play rates of any champion period, and she also had a constant negative win rate. 2. The buffs did practically nothing to improve either her popularity or her performance. Seems a bit unusual for a champion as simple yet effective as her to be unpopular to begin with, right? She has a free target dash doubling as a knockup on the first enemy champion struck. Her W is a basic AoE poke tool for good damage, her E is a brawn passive that does more damage in exchange for being a bit harder to activate, and her ultimate is a fantastic engage tool. Tanks are routinely on the unpopular side owing to their low carry potential and dependence on teammates, but why is it that Sejuani in particular doesn't get that much going for her? I think it pertains to the fact that priorities have shifted over the years. Though she can certainly put up a fight, Sejuani was always known for doing less damage than other tanks. What she excelled at was engage and lockdown, something that isn't really all that imperative in the modern day. True, having a frontline is indeed helpful, but as you know, the second decade of League has been marked with an obsession towards DPS, causing more utility-centric tanks like Sejuani to no longer be that appealing of an option. If you think about the more popular tanks in League right now, Malphite, Cassante, Ornn, Sion, Galio, Zac, Mundo perhaps, what is one thing they share in greater quantity than Sejuani? Damage. Sure, they're also durable in their own right, but the reason people choose to play them is because they offer the benefits of a tank while simultaneously out-damaging the enemy team. Sejuani fails to keep up in bulk because her overall DPS is a lot worse, and there's not much of a way for her to channel her defensive capability into offensive pressure. Despite technically getting a rework back in 2017, Sejuani's kit suffers from being mutually exclusive, a product of old champion design. Building durability does nothing to empower her kit's offense outside of her W, which to be fair can hurt a lot if you land both parts of it. At the same time, Sejuani isn't a mega health stacker like Skarner, Mundo, and Sion. She's a resistance stacker by way of frost armor, effectively doubling her armor and magic resist while active, giving her strong front-loaded burst resistance. That alone is a conflict, but then she has AP ratios on all 4 of her abilities. What the hell are you supposed to build on her? That is why the buffs to her in 15.24 did next to nothing to make her stronger. They may look like a lot, but in practice, she scales in such a one-to-one fashion that come late game she falls off quicker than other tanks with a more dedicated through line for their scaling. Malphite doesn't fall off late game because in addition to getting tankier, he does more damage. Mundo and Cassante, same thing, but for Sejuani, if you build AP, she becomes way squishier, and if you build tank, she does no damage. Her passive max out damage can only apply twice. A decent amount of DPS in conjunction with her W, mind you, but for comparison, a full combo from Ornn does something like 60% max out damage. In that case, what made Sejuani more popular back then? Frankly, a lot of it was because of her old ultimate. Glacial Prison can only stun one target for 1.5 seconds even if multiple targets are in the same path. The old version, however, was an AoE stun with no minimum distance and a max duration of 1.75 seconds, effectively being a projectile Malphite ultimate. People wanted to use her more back then for wombo combo purposes, whereas the current Sejuani is more of a single target lockdown tank, further worsening her potential to make big plays in the mid to late game when other tanks are way better at 1v1ing than her. I would say the main way to bring her back into meta relevance would be to connect her kit a bit better, maybe give her some armor and MR scaling on one of her abilities, or outright give her a mid-scope update and change her stuff around a bit. She's definitely been power crept in recent times. Another champion that's been mostly forgotten over time, I feel, is Renata. Arguably the least played dedicated support at the moment, Renata's in a similar boat to Sejuani where she's not been mentioned at all in bounce patches beyond the realm of bug fixes. The last time her numbers were adjusted was 12.14, more than 3 years ago. Currently in Diamond Plus, I think she sits at a 50% win rate give or take, so by all accounts, she's in a stable position, and in the few games you run into her, she remains a pressing concern for the opposing team. Sounds like an ideal position to be in, right? I'd assume Riot thinks so, given she hasn't been tinkered with in a very long time. But there is the issue regarding her poor pick rate. The support meta frequently alternates between periods of enchanters dominating followed by tanks dominating. It just so happens that the latter half of 2025 was an enchanter dominated meta, with the likes of Nami, Karma, Lulu, Milio, and Janna holding the lion's share of the market over Leona, Thresh, Nautilus, and Blitzcrank. Yet even with that, Renata's not doing so hot. My theory for that pertains to the priorities thing once again, although unlike Sejuani, priorities haven't shifted away from Renata, more that Renata shifted away from priorities. The entirety of her kit is designed to offer a higher potential output over a similar ability, but at the cost of a potential lower output as well. For instance, Handshake is a 1-second root that can also stun another target, giving her quite a bit of control especially in regards to manipulating enemy position. But while it can lead to devastating results over the competition, most players would rather have something a bit more stable like a Morgana Q or a Nami bubble, as those are more intuitive. The same applies to Bailout. Bailout has the power to be a way stronger buff than anything other enchanters can offer, but oftentimes it produces a less meaningful result than Whimsy, for example. Hostile Takeover is the same thing, incredible area control, disable duration, and possible damage output based on the enemy team composition, but other big wave ultimates like Sona, Nami, Seraphine, and Yumi are less contingent on factors beyond one's control, allowing for them to contribute more consistent results. The conundrum facing Renata is one of range, not attack range, but pressure range. If hypothetically other enchanters had a pressure range of say 90% to 120%, meaning 90 is the lowest it can be and 120 is the highest, Renata is more like 60 to 140. She can possibly be even more useless than them, but she can also be a lot stronger than them. That being said, if you average them out, other enchanters would be at 105 give or take, while Renata has a mean of 100. Therein lies the challenge of making her more popular and effective. Likely the reason Riot hasn't touched her since 2022 is because they understand that giving her even a little more base power can end up having a knock-on effect on that delicate pressure range. Most of her value is kept within the inherent utility of each ability. It's not the damage of Handshake that makes it so strong, it's the remote repositioning and disruption it offers. Likewise, Hostile Takeover doesn't even do any damage, it's about what it can do in a fight, or what it might not do. Essentially, even if they wanted to give her power, there isn't much they can do in a way that doesn't tap into more problematic territory. They also want to be careful not to buff her numbers carelessly, as those represent the only consistent parts of her kit. Renata's like a house of cards, where technically everything is working in place, but it's in such a way that makes her feel like more work for ultimately the same end result compared to a different enchanter. She needs a bit more to feel good to play, but her unique abilities make it next to impossible for Riot to give her any more than what she currently has. It's much easier to raise or lower the numbers on Nami or Lulu than it is on Renata. The last example I want to bring up would be one of the newer champions in the game. I say newer, he's been around for 15 years. I'm obviously referring to the updated version of Skarner. Skarner was always one of the least popular champions in the game back when he was pink and shiny, mostly because of his annoyingly impractical Crystal Spire mechanic. The whole point of getting a visual gameplay update was to fix that by making him more consistent and practical, and initially that appeared to be the case, but following a slew of nerfs not too long after, he pretty much went back to the way he was, extremely unpopular in jungle and no longer existent in top lane. Unlike the first two champions I went over, Skarner has been frequenting patch updates. Just recently, he got 2 buffs back-to-back in 15.22 and 15.23, yet despite getting a hefty spread of increases, Skarner still has had issues being a consistent pick. In the Sejuani part, I went over how she suffers from the old-school tank scaling, where she has a bunch of frankly pointless AP ratios that do nothing to help her scale in this more damage-oriented meta. Prior, Skarner had that issue as well, but now he no longer does. His passive does max health damage over time against enemies, his Q scales off his own bonus health, as well as the enemy's max health, giving him tons of HP scaling in his kit. Not to mention his W being a max HP shield, and his E being max health damage off his own max health. Credit where it's due, Skarner with a couple items can be a massive threat to the enemy backline. Evidently, he doesn't struggle to deal any damage, but then why is he still so unpopular? It resembles the same problem as Renata, where despite being a tank juggernaut, Skarner can really struggle to be either a tank or a juggernaut. Though he can do big damage, it's actually really difficult to land the full force of his kit on a single target with how clunky everything feels. Sure, if he has the opportunity to land his Q, his passive, his W and E, Skarner hits like a truck, but it's actually very difficult to do so. The purpose of a juggernaut is to have very consistent and easy to access damage. Darius, Mordekaiser, Garen, Udyr, Mundo. The best way to handle them is to simply avoid them altogether. Skarner's combo can be way more unwieldy to access. On the other hand, tanks are supposed to have consistent hard crowd control to make use of. Neither Expulse Impact nor Impale are characterized by their consistency. True, when they work really well, but they can be tough to land unless you have the right team comp or an immobile enemy team. People would rather have a Malphite with a brainless ultimate or a Zac with a ton of AoE pressure and disruption, because even if Skarner can do more DPS, and that's a man-sized diff, consistency of output matters a lot more. It's much easier to play around a Malphite or Zac than it is a Skarner. The thing is, in a similar fashion to Renata, Skarner is the type of champion who can achieve potentially more than other tanks of his class, with the caveat that he can also do significantly less. And for people wondering why not just make him a bit more consistent, we run into the same issue. Skarner's just really freaking good when you give him an inch. Again, this guy can do damage on par with a full HP stacking Mundo, maybe not as immediately, but certainly not to where the ADC can't just ignore him the way they can a proper tank. Expulse Impact in particular can lead to an over 2-second suppression and stun mixture. Meanwhile, Impale is a potential 3-man suppress, single-handedly deciding an entire team's chances of victory if it connects. It is that very reason why Skarner's a victim of pro play jail. He was abused so much in 2024 that Riot had to turbo nerf him to near unviability. 14.12 and 14.13 were massive blows to him, and he really hasn't been able to recover since. If anything, he got nerfed even more. 14.20 and 14.23 were also heavy. The whole purpose of him doing an excessive amount of max health damage was to account for the fact that you rarely if ever could land your entire combo on them. That was there to handle margin of error, but then they ended up taking that away. Despite not being overloaded, Skarner basically got the Cassante treatment, where he was practically a shell of what he used to be. Granted, again, he was obnoxiously overtuned, way too tanky and did way too much damage, even if he missed half of his stuff. But we're now in a situation where Riot's not sure on how to give him more legroom for solo queue without breaking open the floodgates for pro play. Damn near everything in his skin had to get nerfed for people to stop using him. Damage, durability, CC duration, cooldowns, base stats, you name it. I can understand why Riot's so hesitant to give him back even a little bit. You'll notice in 15.22 he was buffed in AD ratios and even cooldowns, but they altered his W to where you couldn't hold on to the final hit and then immediately pick a second one up, and made the cast time longer on Impale, practically buffing and nerfing him at the same time. Only recently did they want to touch him up a bit, but they essentially ditched him all throughout 2025. You know, it's interesting talking about forgotten champions, because even I'm surprised by how, for example, Renata hasn't been buffed or nerfed in 3 years. During that time, she pretty much fell off the face of the planet despite being a new champion. She may even be more unpopular than Rel was before the rework. Maybe she might need to get a minor rework or adjustment to make her less overwhelming in the right conditions but more popular to play. The idea of a modern champion having less than a 1% pick rate is kind of unacceptable, but what do you guys think? Do you believe there's a way Riot can bring these champions back to the forefront, or is it for the best that they're kept in the position they are? Let me know in the comments down below. That'll be all for today, so if you enjoyed the video, I would appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter @Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other champion discussion videos if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.